What if you were born with a gift that you never tapped into? Hey ladies, I'm back, and today I'm super excited to share an interview with you. I have Mimi Young. She's a shamanic practitioner, and she's the founder of Ceremonie, a ritual-based brand that offers spirit medicine education and shamanic aura care and skin care. Mimi's purpose is to help you connect to your spirit allies and realize your purpose. You can check her out at shopceremonie.com, and Ceremonie is spelled Ceremonie. That's shopceremonie with IE.com. Okay, so Mimi reached out to me a while back, and I really connected to her message. And although I am not a shamanic practitioner, and I've dabbled a little bit into shamanism, I think today's interview is really, really important, because too often I attract women who are, they call it woo-woo, right? We call it woo-woo. We're like, oh, I'm a little woo-woo, but we're not giving ourselves permission to really dive into that realm that is not yet celebrated mainstream. Because we all know there's something bigger, and maybe we've grown up in a religious background, and so we've decided to formulate beliefs based on religion. But what about that part of yourself that just knows? What about that part of yourself that just feels? That part of yourself that creates or craves these spiritual rituals? And shamanism, regardless of your beliefs around it or not, is just a spirit guide. And the more we connect to ourselves, the more we realize there is something bigger than us at play. And I'm really excited to share Mimi's story with you today. She has a very powerful story as a mother and her awakening and how parenting and motherhood did that for her. And also, it's the holidays. And she has this beautiful, beautiful line of skincare and, like she said, aura care. And it's just this magical connection to the earth and yourself, and how we can do that through essence. We're all buying things for people during the holidays, and oftentimes we're running to the store and we're just picking up crap. But what if you're doing this with intention? What if you have spiritual intention behind it? What if energetically you are aligned with how you want to feel and the gift that you want to give to somebody else? So check out Mimi's shop again at shopceremonie.com. And I'm really excited for you to dive in and listen to this interview as well. And as always, please let me know, give me feedback, send it to me, DM me on Instagram at mamasincontrol, or send it to us via email at support at heatherchauvet.com. We're good. Welcome, Mimi. I'm so excited to have you here.
Thank you for having me, Heather.
Yay. So this is a topic that I have heard about. It's almost like, those things in your consciousness where you hear about them, they come in. It's not yet right in front of you where you're like, I need to know about this, but it's on the horizon. And so I think you or your assistant might have reached out they were talking about what you're up to. I'm like, I want to know more. And also I think your story is so beautiful and connected to my message, which is all about mamas in control. Has nothing to do with, controlling externally. It's all about controlling internally and asking ourselves, how do we want to feel and what does that look like? So I think the work that you do in the world is so beautiful to help people get to that space. So welcome. And I'm so excited to talk about what you are up to. We're going to talk about shamanism. I don't even know how to introduce it. So I'm just going to give the microphone to you and be like, go, do, tell.
Thank you so much, Heather. So shamanism, it's not a religion, but it's a ancient spiritual practice that has existed from the beginning of humanity, and it is practiced all over the world. At the core, it's about relating to the land. So the land meaning plants, animals, and then elements such as wind or rock or water. And the way one relates, of course, is the three-dimensional. And, if you were to evolve this a little further, that would be what we understand as herbalism, or understanding animals and animal husbandry, for instance. But from a spiritual perspective, it's understanding these specific entities through their spirits, and then receiving the medicine of the eagle, or medicine of mugwort, the herb, or medicine of, fill in the blank. So the work that I do involves making aura care and skin care, which is essentially energy work in the form of material products, like things that you can tangibly use, apply to your face, apply to your body, apply to your aura to enhance you and support you in the ways that you need. And then the other work I do is to actually travel to the spirit places on behalf of clients, to ask questions, to discover their power animals, let's say, to bring whatever restoration that they would like to take place. And it can take many different forms. It could be, like a simple question of, it's a profound question, but simple enough. And I hear it fairly often is, who am I at the core? Like, who am I as a soul? And what is my purpose here on earth in this particular life? So that would be a common question. Or it could be something like, these are the patterns that I am repeatedly confronting. And oftentimes they're asking for help because it's a negative pattern. And so I may go on a past life journey, discover what as a soul that person has experienced, possibly and very often discovering the root, then releasing it. And then, of course, when one area has experienced that transformation, it trickles down to everywhere else. So that at the core is what shamanic work is. I do not use psychedelics during my professional practice. I think it's important to mention that because I think some people may equate, using entheogens or psychedelics as the way to access the spirit world. I use a rattle and a drum, and drumming and rattling, it works to entrain your brain waves to what is understood as theta brain waves, and that's really where so much of our soul information, our cellular memory, and our beliefs and wounds and emotions are stored. And so when that area when that amplitude of your brain or frequency of your brain waves is being invited to really come forth, then I can access the spirit world through that means.
I love this. And the more I learn about different ways of being, not different ways of being in the world, but the more I gather information from different types of practitioners, when I strip away the label or the name, I'm like, we're all accessing, I don't want to say the same thing, but we're all bringing each other back home. We're just doing that through our own modality.
Totally.
And the beautiful thing about that is when you let go of the ego and say, I'm very open. Like, I'm open to receiving. I'm open to getting there. How can I make that happen? You allow these things in. So I'll give you an example. This weekend, I was hosting a retreat. And there was about 12 women there. And we go into, I call it a vortex, but it's, we're together from Friday afternoon to Monday, and I take their cell phones away. Like, they don't even know what time it is. They're like, what time? And, all the control tactics are gone. And some of them freak out, and some of them are absolutely relieved that they don't have to worry about anything. And they're completely mothered, right? They're taken care of. They don't have to wash a dish. They don't have to, prep anything. And it's just funny to watch them resist that and go like, who am I if I'm not cleaning up? Who am I if I'm not
packing lunches? Yeah.
Yeah, packing lunches or mothering other people. And this weekend we had a Kundalini teacher there, and she did a lot of, I've gone to Kundalini classes, and, she makes it her own practice because of all the education that she's had. And so a lot of somatic, like breath work and things like this. And watching, so I have a method to my madness of where I'm getting with this story, but watching, these people go through this process and their resistance, right? Their resistance to being open to trying something new was interesting, because I know that if I was like, hey, why don't you guys try this? They would never do it outside of this container of space. Mm-hmm. So I want to know, one, were you into shamanism? Is that what I'm supposed to say? Shamanism?
Yeah, totally appropriate. Yeah.
Experiences before becoming a mother, or was that the journey that led you to this type of work?
So the answer is yes and no. So if I were to give you the shorter, longer version of the story, so I have to include a bit of that longer story, but I'll shorten it as much as I can, and then I'll answer the mothering piece in a moment. So as a child, a very young child, pre-verbal, I remember having what later on I discovered are just called imaginary friends. But as a child of 2 and 3, I felt they were very, very real, and they were plants. So there were trees and fruit and vegetables and things that I eventually developed names for, and I just called them what they were. Like carrot was carrot, celery was celery, and eventually I named my doll Celery because I loved the name so much. And then there was like grandma tree and grandfather tree. And that sort of ended. As you all know, a lot of times the magic is stripped away as you grow up, living in the kind of culture that we live in that is so detached from land. And so I eventually just dismissed that as figments of my imagination. It was just play. And then around my late teens, so 18, 19, I would start experiencing paranormal activities that involved scent. So I'd smell things, oftentimes plant-based smells, and I learned through trial and error what they meant. So I learned that if I smelled, for instance, jasmine, it's actually a reminder for me to call my mom, and things like that. And there would be positive smells and negative smells. I'm putting this in air quotes because technically all of it is good. They're just serving you as information. You decide what to do with that information. And so the quote unquote negative smells would be like scents that I understood as like dishonesty, or not having my back, or greed. And once again, it was through a lot of trial and error, and also a fair amount of denial that stuff was real. And to give you a little bit more of a context, I grew up in a home where my father is atheist, and then my mom was a practicing Buddhist, but then switched over to evangelical Christianity. And so, under the new normal of Judeo-Christianity, it's not only, like one tactic would be the church would say that stuff's not real. Another tactic would be saying that stuff is evil or demonic. And so I just did my best to ignore the sense. So now responding more directly to the question of motherhood, with my the pregnancy of my second child. So I have 2 boys, where I've brought 2 beautiful boys into this world. We're part of the boys club, Heather.
Yeah, a lot of masculine energy.
Oh yeah, tons. And we wanted to conceive a second child relatively soon after the birth of my first son, but it didn't happen. I had a few miscarriages, and when I finally was able to keep a pregnancy to the second trimester, and this would be my second son, I was over the moon. And but what happened was I started hemorrhaging again. And at that point in time, I thought that I was going to miscarry. And so through various tests and probing and ultrasounds and this and that, they discovered that there was nothing physically wrong. They could not explain why I was hemorrhaging as long as I was standing up, but as long as I was reclining, I was okay. So I was given, orders to be on bed rest. And it wound up being from week 14 of my gestation to week 37, which is like 5.5 months. It's a long time to be lying in bed. So I couldn't even get up and make toast for my son for breakfast. That would be enough to get me bleeding again. And so it was 24/7 in bed. I took meals in bed. I took very, very quick sponge baths, essentially, near bed. Bathroom breaks were quick. And I had a lot of time on my hands. So I decided early on in the bed rest that I was going to begin meditating again. And meditation for me was just one of those super annoying practices that I knew was good for me, but I didn't like doing it because it's really hard. During the last 2 minutes of shavasana and yoga, that would be my norm of meditating. And I thought that was to be totally still for 120 seconds was next to impossible for me. It's like asking a puppy to sit. So I thought, this is what I'm going to do. I have 5.5 months ahead. Let's do this. So it started with the 2 minutes, and it incrementally stretched to 5 to 10 minutes, eventually to an hour. And after that, it grew to about 5 hours of meditation a day. That took a lot of time and a lot of struggle. And then one day during the meditation, I accessed that world that I was talking about before, that spirit world. And I met my allies, and they said some stuff that I had completely forgotten about, from early on in my life. And they answered some questions that I've carried within me, but these are not questions that you can really ask humans. And then they also foretold a few things that was going to happen in my circle of people, and all those things happened. And so when I came out of that journey, that shamanic journey, I was like, wow, this is real. This is definitely not my imagination. And later on, of course, there were things that happened that verified the validity of this. It wasn't just my imagination once again. And that's when I was able to start looking back and piece all those other things, like my relationship with the trees as a child, my relationship with scent, and so forth.
This is so, you have nothing but time, and it's like you have to surrender, and it's, you're there. It's like you're backed into a corner. Obviously, our experiences are very, very different, but, life is showing you one thing, and you're like, I surrender. I am here. I will listen. And so it's like you're pulling back the layers, you're getting rid of all the yuck, right? Everything you've been told, everything you've been taught, cultural expectations, and working through the thought process and kind of coming back home to yourself. So did you consider this I'm saying it wrong, shamanic?
Yeah,
you know what I'm saying? Shamanic experience? Did you know that that's what it was at that time? Or did you consider this, something that came through to you in meditation? Were you into shamanism before? Were you like, oh, this is what I'm accessing? Or were you really confused in that moment? How did you get to that? Besides, obviously, the validity of what you were seeing and experiencing, and then that coming true on the outside, did you know it was a shamanic experience?
Yes, I did know it was shamanic. But what I knew of shamanism was kind of how you described it before, in the beginning of our chat, that I knew that thing exists. It's at slightly more than an arm's distance. And it wasn't something that I was interested in. I certainly was practicing esoterics in other ways. For instance, I learned how to work with tarot. I was interested in journaling my dreams and things like that. But it wasn't I wouldn't define those things as necessarily shamanic, those practices. yeah, so it happened once during the entire bed rest. And I remember trying to go back there because it was sort of like, whoa, this was so mind blowing. And now I want more, but I couldn't remember how I got there. And, so I tried, it didn't happen. And it was actually during the birthing of my second child that I was able to go back there. Except this time, it wasn't to the spirit realm. It was inside my body. I met my second child before he was physically born. And essentially, it was a very quick birthing process. Like the labor was very abrupt and just super accelerated. And at one point, I felt that it was stalling. And I was like, what's going on? And just very naturally, once again, not totally on purpose, I went back in. I saw my chakras, particularly my second chakra, which is the birthing or creativity chakra. And he was inside, and he was humming and hawing, actually, because he had hesitation about leaving my physical body. He did not want to leave my womb. And I basically, once I understood that, I was able to offer the nurturance and the reassurance that he needed. And so I said, we're going to be cuddling really soon, and you are going to love my breast milk. Like, I remember saying that. And there's all these other people that are excited to meet you. And with that, it was like 10 minutes. He was born. And so that would have been my second journey. And when, after he was born, I was back on my feet and, being mom of two then. And I spoke to a girlfriend about everything that had been going on and, during the past 5.5 months. And I said, I've got a mortgage to pay. I've got 2 mouths to feed. Like, I'm not able to just jump on a plane and head over to Peru and, take ayahuasca and meet some shaman. Like, even though I knew I knew the access point to continue this practice was with someone who is knowledgeable in these ways. And she said, oh, well, I know of a shamanic practitioner. And she's like the second generation shamanic practitioner, lives off of British Columbia, like on Vancouver Island. I'll put the two of you in touch. And so I started learning from her, and she gave me the language, because rather than me calling a lot of the things thingies, which, because I didn't have the language for it, or, I was able to just have more of that formal education around it. But it was quick, because that information was already doing its best to come through to me.
It's like, as you were birthing your son, you were birthing yourself.
Totally.
Yeah. Like rebirthing
so true.
That, the child within you, or the person you were before the world told you who you couldn't be.
Mm-hmm. Well said.
So how does that show up in your parenting now? How old are your boys?
11 and 4.
Amazing. So this was 4 years ago when this happened.
Yeah. It'll be about, it's probably like just under 5, because my younger one, he's 4.5. And so so I would say it's closer to 5 years ago.
Almost 5 years.
Once you consider the pregnancy.
So how has this transformed who you are now?
So many different ways I could answer this question. I would say it certainly helps me with, the day-to-day interpretation of things. I can see things on the physical realm, and then I can also see things, how they relate symbolically. Mm-hmm. And so if I understand the actual symbolism of all this, then it's just easier to get to the core. So I feel that the conversations I have with my 2 sons, and, I have more of a definitive marker of before and after, because I have my older son. Like, some of those things I wasn't applying yet. So I'm able to just dive a little deeper, faster, when I speak with them, when I'm helping them work through, the challenges that they face on the playground or whatnot. Being able to identify patterns that show up their distinct sort of like life stuff that they, even as like little humans, are working through. And also just cultivating more ritual. We make bedtime a really sacred time. And I do think that bedtime is really sacred for most families. And there's more, there's rituals of storytelling before bed, let's say, cuddling before bed. And then we also talk about inviting dreams into their actual sleep, specific dreams, and essentially just teach them how to manifest from that point. And of course, using specific plants to give them that ability to understand and retain the dreams. That's certainly part of it. And then even just, sometimes I might need to just journey for them. I've definitely have done that for positive reasons and more for exploratory reasons of wanting to get to the source of something. To even discovering their own past lives, or perhaps an energy that was bothering them that just really needed to be addressed because it was showing up, socially for them, that type of thing.
Awesome. Can you talk a little more about journeying for somebody? Because I'm really curious about this aspect of it. I'm wide open to learning and growing and seeing connections. And old Heather, would have said, oh, that's not me, right? But I would have been meditating and using essential oils and been so attracted to nature. I remember being a child and being scared that I was going to see dead people. And, in hindsight, looking back, it's probably because I was so connected to spirit, and I was like, no, like, I don't know how to manage this. Right. And so as you're getting older, I always tell the ladies that I'm working with, like, whatever's manifesting and popping up in your life, it's an opportunity to just come back home to yourself. There's no like best version of you or new version of you. Like, really, we're just letting go and detoxing and coming back to that little girl and play. So yeah, I would love to know more about journeying for other people.
Okay. So I'm doing it where I live. So I live in the West Coast in Vancouver, Canada. And typically the process would be a client emails me. They have a request.
Where do you live in Vancouver? Like, whereabouts?
I live in a community called Steveston, which is about 30 minutes away from Vancouver proper.
Oh, cool. Okay.
Yeah.
Just curious. I'm in Ontario. I'm on the other side.
Yeah. So this idea is that a client emails me. They ask a question or have a specific request. And then we, find a time that works for both of us. For me, it's simply because it's just so I can schedule it in. And for them, not because they need to be involved in any way. I just need the question and the consent. That's literally all I need. It's just so sometimes clients may have a symbolic date in mind. But, if they don't have a symbolic date in mind, then it would usually be sort of the soonest opening that's available. Then on that day, I will journey on behalf of the client. There's a few rituals that I do ahead of time before the actual formal journey. And then I go on the journey. I invite the spirits, and I typically do it reclined on my bed, and I access that place. And while there, if it's a new client, if I've never worked for them in the form of a shamanic journey before, it's about befriending their spirit guides first. No one's going to answer any questions if they don't trust. That's typically how it works. So I befriend them, and after that, I approach them with a question or the request. And sometimes there may be sort of essentially the journey for me, how I experience it, they're highly visual and they're highly narrative based. So I just follow that narrative, and that narrative may be one single long narrative, or it could have different visions within that narrative that, you can then piece together to form a greater narrative. It really is unique to the individual. And then at the end, I thank the spirits, and then I come back to this world. I write everything down in the form of an email. And as I write it, I'm still in that active trance. So if there's any additional download from their spirit allies at that point, I'll add to that. And then also, after I write that narrative, there's the most important part is the interpretation. Because spirits typically speak in metaphor, or they speak through riddles or through symbols. It's kind of like a dream. A lot of dreams make no sense whatsoever on a rational, logical, linear level. It's only if you really dig and start understanding the metaphors as a form of language, and then I make meaning out of it. So that's part 2 of the email. So there's the narrative, the shamanic narrative. Then there's the interpretation. Sometimes I'll put the interpretation and weave it into the narrative at the same time, because sometimes if you don't have the meaning, you can't really move on and tell the story. And then at the end, there'll be suggestions or spiritual homework that the client can engage with should they want to, if they want to reinforce essentially the aftercare or their own spiritual practice. So that's in this massive long emails. Like my remote shamanic reading emails are very, very, very long. And then I send it off the same day that I journey for the client. So when they get it, they'll read all that. And at the very end of the spiritual homework, there usually is some type of ritual they can engage with right then and there that day, usually in the form of a ritual bath. And the bath would include a set of ingredients that's unique to what had happened during the journey that would support them. And they can go ahead and do it. At the same time, when they book with me, and I know what the question is, I'll also provide them with instructions on a pre-journey ritual that they can do at home before I journey. And that ritual is not meant to support me in any way. It makes zero impact on whether or not the client chooses to engage in that pre-ritual or not. It's just so that it opens them up, so that when the email arrives in their inbox and they read it, it lands home to them in their hearts.
And I think I don't know your perspective on this, but I'm a huge fan of, or believer in, collaboration. When you have the energy of, this is going to fix and solve all of my problems. This person has the answer for me, versus a collaborative, like, knowing, right? Like, okay, this is the answer that I'm trying to solve. This is what I'm doing. I just need additional support. So I'm always talking with my clients about, they're like, this is so easy, or this isn't, I'm like, guys, this living life isn't rocket science. And typically, just like what you're talking about, you're coming back home to yourself. So it should feel familiar. It should feel like we're remembering who we are. But there's this energy of like, oh, out there, I'm going to try this. Now I'm going to try this. Now I'm going to try this, versus I'm on this journey. I need, additional support. Just kind of like you're talking about, talking to the allies and the spirit guides, or whatever the terminology is. We're here to co-create with each other. It's not this all or nothing mentality. So I'm curious your perspective on that, and how, like, I don't want to say the best, the results that your clients see, but what you notice about the ones that it really was beneficial for.
Well, you touched it, right? Like, you totally hit the nail on the head. It is their lives. It's not my life or another practitioner's life. And this is why I bring that option to them of to engaging in a ritual before the actual journey, because it primes them. It's that when they do it, they're saying, yes, I am part of this healing experience. In fact, I am the source of my own healing, and I'm going to do this right now and be receptive to this information. And really, I love how you say remembering, because remembering, if you were to spell it, it's R-E, and really there should be a hyphen, R-E hyphen, and then membering. So we are putting things back that have always belonged to us, right? Like if you're dismembered, right? Dismemberment, it means that a limb has been cut off. Well, the act of remembering is bringing home parts that have always been you, always been you. And so, yeah, answering your question of the kind of clients that have experienced the most change are the ones that are really proactive. They're the ones that are engaged in the rituals. And it's not even the rituals in of themselves. Like, it's going to sound a little bit like a tangent here. So this obsession with crystals, let's say, like, you know, in pop culture, people think that this crystal is going to bring love into their life, or this is going to bring wealth into their life. But actually, it's not, if that's what one thinks it is going to be the case. Like, they have to be active in this experience because they're the ones that are creating their lives. I said this before on another podcast, but with Harry Potter, who's the one with the power? Is it Harry Potter or is it his wand? Like, obviously, we know it's Harry Potter. He uses his wand. It's a support. Just like the work that I offer, it's a support. But at the end, the person who is creating the magic, it's the wizard. And that's each and every one of us in our own lives.
So important. I mean, you just hit the nail on the head. And I think, you know, for those listening, need to ask themselves, am I invested seeking support and guidance? Like, I always like to do a little inventory in my own life. Not so much now because of the mindset I have, but when I first started, why am I doing this? Right? Like, why am I invested? It could have been therapy. It could have been going to my doctors. It could have been, why do I have 20 books on my nightstand? Is it because I'm doing it for pure enjoyment and I want to learn? Or I'm like, the answer is in these books. It's the energy and attention that we put behind something. And I really appreciate this whole conversation, and I want to circle it back to mothering, because the podcast is called Mom is in Control. And I don't know about you, but I feel very isolated in the mainstream culture of motherhood and where it's headed. I always say I want to be a disruptor in the space, but it is, to me, it's very toxic and it's not empowering for women. Mm-hmm. And I think it's doing a disservice, because when we're seeking guidance and, you know, the media or mass, even when I go into bookstores, or you're talking about crystals and now you can buy crystals in bookstores. And I'm like, I can feel the energy coming off those crystals. Like, that's not a fucking crystal. Like, that's probably, it just doesn't feel authentic. Right. And these books of like how to have it all and how to, you know, the superwoman and all of this stuff. And the wine, oh, don't get me on the soapbox, like wine clock and mommy juice and all of this.
Oh my God. Yes, totally.
But what is your perspective of like what it means to be a mother in control, and how do you see your position and role in your boys' lives?
I love that question so much. I could talk about it all day, and of course I won't. But so I'll give you a little bit of context in my life, and then I can more directly answer the question. I don't know if this was something that you experienced when you became a mom, but it was as if when I gave birth to my first child, I was told by other mothers, by society, by culture, by media, by everything around me, that I had to shrink. A good mother does not wear red lipstick, flaming red lipstick, because, you know, now she has to be pure and she has to be a morally positive influence on her children. Wow. A good mother has to be fit, but can't flaunt it too much. A good mother has to bake everything, and it has to be like extra nutritious, because like, God forbid we give something to our child that's not like 100% organic, handmade, and like, planted from our own backyard.
Right.
A good mother, a good mother doesn't have any other desire but to serve her own kids. Like, all that became really suffocating to me. And because I live in a suburb outside of Vancouver, I feel that in the city, there's a little more diversity. Like in very urban places, there's a little more diversity. But in the burbs, it is like the soccer mom that is the prevalent normative standard. And if you don't fit in that, it is totally isolating. And I really did struggle with that. And it also made me angry, because it was something like, whoa, I'm a mom, but yeah, like, I still like to go have fun. I still have a sex drive. I still want to feel beautiful. I still want to enjoy the things I've always done. But when I became a mother, it was like, wow, all the archetypes that were acceptable before had to be taken back and hidden, and couldn't be edgy anymore, couldn't be anything. And I think the vanilla-ness of that definition of mother really broke me. And so when you ask, what does it mean to be a mother who is in control? My answer is to be a fully embodied, integrated woman that understands her role as a mother, but knowing that that is not the only identity that she owns. I can be all these expressions of who I am, and I'm allowed to change. I'm allowed to not only change and evolve, but I'm allowed to change my mind. I'm allowed to experiment. I'm allowed to make mistakes. And I'm also allowed to not feel like I have to fit into all that. And what's interesting is when I gave myself that permission and started being like all of me, what was interesting is, yes, certainly there were some moms that thought that it was odd or strange, but I think it also created a lot of amazing conversations that then led to incredible friendships, because they saw, wow, this one mom is daring to be herself. Well, I'm feeling that too, and I want to be able to do that. And I've had these conversations with other moms, and it's interesting how when we're doing our own personal work, like how much that impacts those around us and beyond. Because now all of a sudden there's a bunch of other moms that are totally being who they are. Yeah. And not letting, motherhood as an archetype from a societal perspective dictate to them.
Yeah, it's a role. To me, it's a relationship, right? And I see myself as a guide for my children, and I don't have to know the answer. I just have to say, this is what life is presenting. Let's figure it out together. I'm not the expert, but I'm going to be a safe space for you to fall. I'm not going to do all the work for you, because that's codependency, and that's not, oh gosh, we could talk about this forever. That's a whole other podcast episode, but it's like, who do you want to be, and who do you want to figure out? How do you want to feel in your life? And I will do the work. I always say, becoming the person you most desire your children to be. And although I'm male, I'm raising all boys, I want them to watch me and say like, wow, she was terrified to do that, and she did it anyways.
Totally.
And you say something about kind of becoming yourself and other people watching you, which is such a weird concept, because you're like, what feels good? Okay, go do that. And you inspire people, one, by feeling good and being yourself. The other day, I was driving somewhere. Actually, we were at our retreat and we were going hiking. And we entered this park. It was like a national park. And I was like, oh, there was a sign. It was like, oh, you need a pass. And I had no idea, because I didn't prepare for this. I knew we were going to go. I knew we were going to go for a hike somewhere, and I kind of knew where we were going to go. But when I'm in retreat mode, like I have my outline, and then I just throw it out the window, and I'm like, what am I guided what do I feel guided to do right now?
Mm-hmm.
So we're going for this hike. I'm like, oh, I need a pass. Okay, I'm going to go into the office. I'm going to get a pass for us. And, the woman in the car next to me, she said, or one of my clients in the car said, that moment inspired me. Like, you had no idea what you were doing. You kind of knew where you were going, but you didn't check out the park before we got there. You just showed up and you were like, wow, it's a beautiful day. Oh, I need a pass. Okay, get a pass. Okay, where do I park? Okay, you park here. Oh, let's go on this trail. Oh, look, there's beautiful falls. It's like showing up for
You're being present. Yeah.
Yes, being present. But it's such a weird concept because I always there's this fine line of vulnerability of, am I being enough? And that's, I think we fall into that trap as women and mothers and business owners. Like, am I being enough by just being myself? And we have to trust that there's just so much that we will never know, that people cannot communicate. And, there's something way bigger than us that's orchestrating all of this. So I continue to believe that if I just follow my heart and follow my passion and keep saying, how can I feel better? How can I be 1 degree better today? That's like the greatest parenting strategy we can ever give our children. And of course, the world.
Totally. I love it. It's said so beautifully.
Thank you. So Mimi, where can people get a hold of you? I know you have, is it an online shop for your products that you're selling? And obviously they can go on your website to learn more about your experiences and what you can do for people. But where are you hanging out these days? And what's the best way for people to connect with you?
So they can visit my website, which is shopceremonie.com. And Ceremonie is spelled with an IE at the end. And there they can access the aura and skincare, as well as, my background story. A lot of content is found on the blog, but also the spirit medicine education. So there's the live online courses. There are on-demand courses, and there are, in Vancouver, in-person, face-to-face courses and events. And then also on Instagram. So the handle is similar to the website. It's at Shop Ceremonie, once again with an IE at the end. And I'm fairly active on Instagram, where they can find a little more kind of truncated information and tips and whatnot via the Instagram channel.
Amazing. Thank you. And I think we will be in that area in January.
Oh, amazing. Are you coming?
I believe I am. So we have friends there, and we're looking to travel for January and February. So I'm like, I'll get a little bit of like the nice winter-ish, and then I'll go away, like get out of Canada. So when I head in that area, if I head in that area, I'm definitely going to reach out and see what you're up to.
I would love that.
Yay. Thank you so much. This is the beauty of the internet. I mean, there's pros and cons to everything. It's just how we choose. But I've met so many amazing women around the world because like attracts like. So thank you for sharing your message and for being here on the podcast.
Thank you so much, Heather.